Thanks very much for joining us today. The purpose of this talk is to run through future-proofing your business through DE&I. So, spoiler alert for my first slide, it's not very far off before we have 5 different generations employed in the workplace. So really we want to talk about those 5 different generations and what those differences look like, what could result as some of the challenges of having that diverse set of employees, and then finally cover off some solutions. So let's check that this works. Let's see if I can move a slide on. Oh, hashtag fail at the first. Let's use that. There we go. So a quick 2 sentences about myself. My name is Susie Ruffley. I'm the Global Head of People and Sustainable Culture at Foresight Group. I'm also the lead on sustainability and all things DE&I and people at Foresight Sustainability Partnering. I'm a business psychologist, so I have an undergrad in applied psychology and dual masters, one in occupational psychology and one in coaching psychology. And somehow I've managed to amass a whopping 19 years worth of human capital experience. I'm still surprised by it myself, but it's something I'm super passionate about. And I think today is going to be a really interesting and informative session. And somebody who else is a wealth of knowledge on this is Ian, who will be co-presenting with today. Ian, do you want to say a couple of lines about yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ian Barrow. I'm Client Services Director here at WorkBuzz. And I've been working in the field of employee engagement and culture, and even before it was known as employee engagement. We're coming up to 30 years now, so a long time working in this field. Probably one of the first people looking at employee engagement and its forerunners of that in the UK. I've worked in the past for a number of organisations, but mainly with running and analysing and working with C-suite who are running big global surveys. So I ran the global survey for HSBC, for example, which was about 385,000 people across the globe, Tesco and Amazon and organisations like that. So working with C-suites really to look at these kind of key factors of trends within the workforce and trends within data at a macro and a micro level as well. So how does that impact businesses and what do they need to do to meet those challenges?
Super. And in keeping with the theme of modernising and technology, we've got our little QR codes underneath the pictures there. So if anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn, do feel free to pop your camera over the QR, and that should take you to our LinkedIn pages where we can connect. I'll also say that we'll be sharing the slides with everybody. So this content will all be coming your way, and also our contact details will be on there. So if you've got any further questions that you want to raise outside of this forum, then you'll have the ability to do that. So what's occurring? So essentially, we've now hit the milestone of 2024, and we're just 6 short years away from 2030. And why that's important is because there's currently 4 generations of employees in the workplace as we stand right now. But by the time we hit 2030, there'll be approximately 10,000 baby boomers per day reaching 65. And whilst that won't necessarily be retirement age, I'm sure it's certainly an age that a lot of people have got in mind in terms of reviewing what their career status looks like. But it also means that 30% of the workforce will be Gen Z. So we're going to have a huge mix in terms of our employee base. So we've given you 2 already, but on a scale of 1 to 5, we'd just like to poll how confident you feel in terms of being able to name the other descriptors for the 5 generations that we're going to be talking about. Or potentially even you could think of the question more meaningfully as how confident would you feel being able to actually describe each generation for the last 5 generations? So we've got not strongly confident, not confident, neutral, confident, and strongly confident. So if you could just click on where you feel. you lie. That would be really interesting for us just to gauge how much detail we need to share in terms of the different generational labels. Now, I can't see any movement on that. I don't know if anybody else can. Oh, very good. So where are we up to? How many votes have we got? Can we see that? Oh, wonderful. The polls are in. Oh, wonderful. Okay. So, well, nobody's strongly confident. So there we are. We'll spend a little bit more time just talking through some of the more generalized statements we can make. And actually, most people feeling not confident. So that's great. This session should definitely be helpful. So we'll close that poll and we'll move on to doing exactly that. We're going to talk through some of the different generational labels. So what we've got here are the 5 generations that we currently have in the workspace. Baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, also more commonly known as millennials, Generation Z and Generation Alpha. And we've put underneath here the years that these roughly assimilate to, because you can find different sources where these dates might vary ever so slightly. And we've also put the ages that correlate, just in case your brain, like mine, is very thankful for those sums having already been worked out for you. So just to give a bit of context for each different generational label. So we've got the baby boomers, and if you look at the year where they're coming into play, it's post-Second World War. And the descriptor came in as a very literal term because there was a baby boom. So there was a huge uptick post-war in terms of the number of babies being born, which then in turn led into an increase in infrastructure and an increase in terms of the economy. So we also had significant historical time of during their fruition. So there was the civil rights movement, the Cold War, the rise of consumerism. So all of these things really played into shaping the baby boomers. They actually pushed back on a lot of political pieces as well. They participated in protests. They saw the rise of feminism. So a really interesting time. And the positive economy also leads them to another one of their labels, which is the bank of mum and dad. Moving on to Gen X, so they also grew up in a really rapid period of social change. So still with very much this mindset of anti-establishment, still lots of challenges. They were also quite quick to get on the property ladder. So baby boomers being the generation very much considered to have been earlier on in their lives getting on that property ladder. This was also characterized by Gen X as well. And they really benefited from economic prosperity pretty much up until around COVID time. And there we saw the dip. But that also meant for Generation X, there was this real embrace for entrepreneurialism and small businesses. And then if we move on to Gen Y, the millennials. So again, this generation a bit slower to get on the property ladder, predominantly because of the rise in house prices and also the flatter wages that we saw coming through. And I suppose one of the big things that millennials are known of is for their coming of age in the digital era. So really sort of the rise of social media and the rise of digital technology in your hand being of interest in shaping Gen Y there. And then also, if we think about the millennials and what we can characterize there, very much around this want for work-life balance, a social conscience as well. So wanting to see that there was some real thought going into those areas, and the beginnings of sort of tech adaptability. And then we have Gen Z, So Gen Z, as I referenced, going to shortly have 30% of Gen Z as the working population. So they were the first generation to grow up in the 21st century. And I think you can really see that they're being much more shaped by the millennium than the actual millennials. A real comfort with online communication, and a real diverse and inclusive set of attitudes coming through. Another key theme is the real want for authenticity. So not just companies making bold statements around what they're going to do, but actually how are you doing it? And very much the same in terms of their brand loyalty. They want to actually understand how they're operating in that space. Again, there was a big impact in terms of COVID. So they really learned and understood that there can be huge social and economic change as a result of the pandemic, which made them slightly more conservative in their decision making, but also much more resilient. And then we've got Generation Alpha. And that descriptor, alpha, was chosen specifically to recognize that this really is the start of something completely new. They're the first generation to be born solely in the 21st century. And with that also comes a huge cognizance and understanding of technology. So interestingly, you can see that the age starts in the birth year of 2010. That was actually the year that Instagram was launched and also the year that the iPad was launched. So if you think about in terms of the way that they've been exposed at a very young age to technology and how that is influencing their development, you can really see huge changes. And once again, a big impact in terms of COVID. So a big chunk of what is their relatively short life to date was affected by that. And that's really impacted their ability to think of the world as a much more global place because we experience this pandemic globally. Also about interconnectivity, but then obviously with a heavy focus on tech. Excuse me. So these are at a high level, the generational descriptors and a brief description of each. Now, I think what's really important to say here is these are huge, sweeping, generalizing statements, but they're designed to be illustrative of what people have experienced. So what have they experienced in their lifetime that might have shaped them as individuals? It's certainly not saying that these are any individual preferences. They're just illustrations to help us understand potential expectations of different generations. So this slide's just a bit of fun. And as I say, these slides are going to be shared with you. So I'm not going to go through every single aspect, or we won't get to the good stuff of the challenges and the solutions. But this is, again, these high sweeping statements, but it's just to highlight the differences. So from the baby boomers, iconic Ford Mustang car to Gen Alpha, having, autonomous vehicles and potentially not even needing to do their driving tests or have the want or the need. We often hear examples of Gen Z proactively choosing not to engage in driving because of the environmental impact that it has, and actually looking at other forms of transport or waiting for green autonomous vehicles to be in play before they even consider that as a way to get about. All the way through to musical devices. So I would imagine that everybody's au fait with the audio cassette and the painstaking trying to record your favourite songs with stop-start and praying with your fingers crossed that the DJ wasn't going to talk over the beginning or the end of your favourite song, right through to now having the smart speakers where even my 3-year-old can request jingle bells all year round. I mean, it's fabulous. But it just goes to show the huge change in the different things that people have experienced and the different ways that we have gone through things that are meaningful and useful to us as we've progressed. So what do these mean in terms of work? And again, I want to really focus on the challenges and make sure you get solutions out of this. So I'll just pick out a couple of pieces. But if you think about the way that people experienced work when they were in their sort of mid-careers, you can really see the difference in terms of what people are expecting. So the baby boomers' learning style, for example, was very structured. It was very text-based. It was very formal. Whereas if you move through to Gen Z, you can see that it's much more forum-based, and that might be virtual, it might be classroom-based, or it might be a hybrid, but a total change in terms of the learning style. And it also makes it much more open to a wider range of people than it has ever historically been available for. And you can see in terms of marketing, for example, where we've moved from broadcasting one communication, that one-sized must fit all, to where we've got digital and social media, where we're actually targeted by algorithms to make sure that the messaging is relevant, meaningful, and landing with the individuals. So a huge change in terms of leadership style, leader type, learning style, influencing, and marketing. And when we think about that further in terms of the shift in expectations of when people are coming to work, we can think of that in terms of the difference of core values, the difference in terms of work ethic, communication preferences, feedback preferences. And again, we can think around these sorts of stereotypes, remembering that it is a huge generalization. But you're thinking about work ethics moving from very focused, so people that of the baby boomer generation, expecting a very clear job description, understanding exactly what they are supposed to be doing. That is what they will be doing, moving right through now to the Generation Z and thinking much more around the want for flexibility in a role. So you often find that there's time put in for 80% of the core role to be carried out, but with 20% flex. So having some forward thinking time, or if you use Teams, for example, having focus time that's automatically put in the diary, and really seeing that actually individuals can bring that real value add themselves. And again, just to pick up on another point, that the feedback preferences, so whether that's direct feedback or whether that's bite-sized feedback or immediate feedback, it's really understanding that there's a huge difference in terms of how people have been shaped through their previous experience and what it is that they'd like to see in the workplace moving forwards. So essentially, the thought is that the consequence of not taking any action, of understanding these 5 different generations that you're going to have in the workspace, industries and businesses will rise or fall. And yet very few organizations seem to be ready for it. So the question to you is, are you ready for it? Is this something that's been on your radar? So we've got a poll now. We'd like you all to think about what are the key challenges that you can think of in terms of understanding that we're going to have this mix of employee base. So, you know, these can be the challenges that you have within your own organization, or challenges that you see for your clients, or just on the wider sense. But we'll just spend about 20 seconds having that text box open so you can put in any challenges that you're aware of. Oh, okay. Sorry, gang. Can you put those in the chat? I don't think the poll is quite live. So if you just want to pop them through, that'd be great. So any challenges that you can think of for your own organization, or any challenges for your clients, or just any challenges that you think spring to mind in terms of having that multi-generational one. Yeah, absolutely. So different motivators, yeah, flexibility, need to move away from email, yeah, talent pipeline, moving conflict, miscommunication, benefits, Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, balancing the needs of different groups, expectations misaligned, retention, meeting expectations. Absolutely. So I think we've managed to capture the majority of those. And again, I wouldn't say that this list is an exhaustive list in any way, shape, or form. But the challenges that we're going to have are around things like communication style. So we've already thought about the difference in terms of communication, whether it be the way that you're communicating, i.e., email, Teams, Slack, chat, short videos, to actually what are you messaging? So is it a message that is going to land with everybody? Do you need to target those communications? How frequently do you need to communicate? Is it face to face? Is it one to one? Is it in a big forum? Is it virtual? Is it in person? So these are all things that people need to start really thinking through. Engagement is absolutely key because this all ties through to it. And I'll leave engagement well alone because I know that Ian's going to talk about engagement in a bit more detail. But we do need to think about collaboration and team dynamics because you've got expectations set. So expectations is just a bit further up. Not only have you got people in a workplace that have been working in one style for a number of years, so they have their expectations. You've also got people entering the workplace with very different expectations of what they expect work to be. So there's going to need to be this real common thread that you can pull through that is going to center everybody so that they still understand the way that they're still working to the same purpose, but understanding how that can happen. So that's managing the team dynamics, collaboration, and expectations. Absolutely, key motivators are different. I mean, we've deliberately not put any of the DE&I stats in here because I'm sure that you're all well aware of them. But you know, the want for flexibility in a role is absolutely a key motivator for the latter generations coming through. Whereas the motivators for the generations prior to that will have very different motives. And as we all know, we actually go through a range of motives throughout our career. So they change as we evolve and change as people too. And we've touched on the feedback and recognition and different styles and different frequencies. There's going to be a range of training and development requirements. And I think really this is really important around just understanding holistically diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then sort of moving on from that, where you need to focus in terms of your own working population. Really getting this understanding around what has shaped their previous experience, and that needs to be shared across all the generational groups. A resistance to change, and that is across all generations. Change is never easy. People have been writing their own scripts and schemas about who they are from the moment they were able to. So facilitating any type of change is a challenge. As we saw in the chat, the technology adoption, so absolutely the way that we're working, the working style and the workplace setup, thinking about the office space if you have one, and what does that need to look like? If you've got a hybrid situation, what's the frequency looking like there? Or if you're working from home, again, considering how that still ties everybody into the one company and organization. Your different types of leadership styles. So we've already said that not necessarily that people want specific leadership styles, but that they have been exposed to particular leadership styles. So perhaps just even acknowledging and understanding that and looking to see what's going to work for your organizations. Yeah, inclusivity and bias. You know, bias is a really interesting piece because everybody has biases. We all have them. We all have essentially preferences. It's just about acknowledging that and bringing it to the forefront of our mind and then understanding what we do with that. So therefore we can create more inclusive workspaces. You know, knowledge transfer and succession planning, really, really interesting. And I think we could go down many rabbit holes on that. You know, I certainly see from my team alone that the knowledge that they bring in they're absolutely right in thinking they're not just a job description and they've got so much more value add, because as we think about AI taking over those very process-driven and repetitive tasks, the people here are really here to use their brains, but it's really interesting about how we get that knowledge to and from and how we plan for the future. Again, in the chat, I think we saw rewards and benefits very, very different. And finally, the work values. So actually understanding how we're tying people together is absolutely key. So those are some of the challenges. At FSP, we look to solution-based answers, essentially. So I'll talk through very quickly some of these, and then we can hand over to Ian, and hopefully at the end, you can tell us about some of your challenges and we can share some best practice, because I think the best piece about DE&I is everybody knows it's the right thing to do. Everybody, I think, is now aware that there's a real competitive advantage if you're taking it on board and doing it well. But it's not competitive in the sense that people are really happy to share best practice. So we're more than happy to share solutions with people. And where we come in is if people don't have the resource or the time or the knowledge, then we're able to partner and share a bit more help and structure around these pieces. But it's really important to have a sustainable culture in place. So sustainability essentially is long-lasting positive impact. So thinking about what does that framework look like for your people in your workspace. So for us here, we think about, in order to create a sustainable culture, we think about having to have a global sustainable growth mindset. Now those align with our core business values, and we have pillars underneath that we fill up to support those. But it's about making sure that you have those plans in place to create that culture, so you're able to essentially retain and engage and attract top talent. So we talked briefly on the last slide about values. So your EVP is your employer value proposition. So if you're talking about how to tie 5 different generations together, you really want people to understand what is the give and the get for working for an organization. So for example, here, ours is succeed today, shape tomorrow. Essentially, the effort that you put in means that you get out having a positive impact on the future of both the sustainable efforts of the organisation and shaping really how we move forwards. And then we have our core values, and your values are actually super important. So if you don't have values in place, or perhaps it's time to review and refresh your values in terms of your organisation, making sure that you've got plenty of feedback using focus groups. And I'm sure that Ian will talk about focus groups and how you can use surveys to really get some meaningful data. But you want to have those values as front and center for everybody to understand, because if you can get everybody to align to the same set of values, then that's a huge win in terms of understanding at least what you're all working towards and how decisions are being made. Leadership coaching is really key. So leadership coaching is really around, are your leaders bought into DE&I? Are your leaders bought into DE&I and get it? Or are your leaders bought into DE&I and don't get it? Or are your leaders just not bought into DE&I, or somewhere in between those options? The piece around leadership coaching is really understanding that if you want a fundamental shift and change in the way that people are thinking, that needs to be coached through. It's very difficult to attend a seminar, a webinar, a training course and think that you've fundamentally changed your understanding. So leadership coaching is something that we think is really helpful for future-proofing businesses, to make sure that there is actually that shift in mindset, and then you're able to implement all these other good pieces. DE&I integration. So how are you getting your organization to understand that DE&I is the role of absolutely everybody? It's not just the HR professional or the CEO or the COO or the DE&I committee or working group. It's absolutely everybody's. And how are you thinking about that? Employee engagement and experience, I know that Ian's going to cover. So I won't dig too deep into that, but happy to hear anybody's challenges and share other best practice around that. Training and development plans, so not just for your leaders, but actually for everybody. How are you thinking about it as a business? How are you having this as an imperative for DE&I? So, for example, you can make it mandatory for everybody in their appraisal to have a DE&I objective that you want everybody to work towards. But how are you upskilling and sharing this knowledge with the people in your organisation? And finally, all of this is nothing without measurement and review. So you need to understand from the very beginning how you are going to measure and review your progress. And with that, I will hand over to Ian, who will take us through that. So I'll just stop sharing my slides, Ian. There we are. And over to you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Susie. Fantastic that and really nice overview of the generations and what we're seeing, and the particularly Generation Alpha as well. They're a very different generation that are coming into the workforce, and obviously looking forward from this point onwards. How do we, these new generations, as it were, coming into the workplace, how are we going to deal with those? And what I wanted to do really was to pick up on the challenges that everybody outlined in the chat, challenges that Susie outlined, but also to give you a feel for how organisations are actually dealing with those. So what I'm going to do is look at how we measure some of these critical issues, these challenges that we've got, and how some organisations are starting to deal with that and what they're looking at. So we'll look at solutions, if you like, in terms of what they're doing. What I just wanted to share with you is some data from surveys that we have been running on WorkBuzz probably over the last quarter. So this is about 170,000 respondents, and really what I've honed in on really is the Gen Y, Gen Z. So you know, these millennials and the group below that in terms of what they're looking for in the workplace, because they're going to be the vast percentage of the workforce going forward over the next 10 years. You know, people of my generation, hopefully I'll have my feet up and be walking the dog over the next 10 years. So this is a generation we need to think about. And the kind of things that we're seeing, I'll just show them all. The kind of things that we're seeing at the moment coming out of the surveys is a strong work ethic and a strong reason for work for these people. And I think, you know, I guess the pandemic, we talk about pandemic, but it was 4, even 5, getting up to 5 years ago now. But it really accelerated that need for many people just to think about why they work. What's the reason for work? What do I do here? And it really caused people to reevaluate their lives. And you've probably heard terms like the Great Resignation and moved into other areas, and huge percentages of people moving out of occupations where they were looking for a better work-life balance. So the care sector in particular, shift workers started to move out of occupations into jobs that were balancing the work lives and the reasons for why they work. So we're seeing shifts in terms of the reason for work and the ethics around that. As I said, we're also seeing this work-life balance and flexibility for these particular generations. That is becoming real priority. So seeing at the moment, particularly in some surveys and some sectors, people reluctant to take promotion into manager positions. And there's a real struggle to get people to do those positions because they're not seeing the uplift in salary as matching the demands of the role and the impact on the work-life balance. So we're seeing some sectors really struggling with that, and that work-life balance and flexibility has become key. The other thing we're seeing is a real desire for different communication vehicles and the need for speed. So whereas my generation, certainly it was a lot about face-to-face meetings and team meetings and doing that in person. Obviously, much of it now, again, through pandemic, it was very much around different types of communication and obviously social communication via electronic means. But that need for speed is growing. So in terms of the demands for communication and speed of communication, again, these generations are really looking for that. So as organisations, if you're going through change processes and you're not getting that information out to people quickly, there's always a bit of a backlash for that in terms of engagement and in terms of the experience that they're having. Technology is always the answer for these generations, nearly always the answer. So in terms of organizations looking at software, in terms of organizations looking at technology as solution, of organizations digitizing their experience as well, that's really the desire from these groups. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that move forward. The other thing we're seeing is this change in longevity of service. So the average length of service at the moment for a Gen Y, a millennial, is round about 2 years to 10 months. It's under 3 years. And when we look at Gen Z, it's similar, but a bit less than that, about 2 years, 6 months. So the gig economy, as a generalization for these two age groups, is very real. You know, they're probably going to stay with you for less than 3 years as a generalization. But within those 3 years, there's a high level of expectation in terms of career and movement and gathering of skills and training and development. So in 3 years, you've got to put an awful lot into a kind of length of service for some of these individuals as well. That's what the expectation levels are. The change, we mentioned that earlier, going through change and the constant need for change. So they don't want to work with organizations that are sitting still. They want to work with organizations that are constantly driving forward and innovating, both as an organization and within roles. Also, there's a level of respect of others and oneself. So perhaps my generation in the past, it was quite autocratic. You know, it was, this is your job, get on with it kind of thing. You know, don't question. Whereas nowadays, you know, the Gen Y and Gen Z, they very much have a level of respect where they want that ability to challenge. They want that ability to have a safe space where they can do that. So safe spaces and the ability to be empowered are really, really relevant for people of these age groups. Entitlement and reward expectations, they're quite high as well. And training, I mentioned that earlier, you know, the need to develop, but it's not necessarily about general skills development, but also about personal development. So not just about how do I advance in the role and what skills do I need, but for me as an individual, how do I develop as an individual, and how do people around me develop as individuals as well? And I guess the one negative we see, or in the main, is a real sense of frustration and impatience. So, as I said, you know, if I'm only staying with the organisation for 3 years, and I see that on my horizon, in that 3 years, I want all of the above. I want flexibility, I want empowerment, I want training, I want development, I want drive, I want to be part of the organisation, I want to be part of the decision-making process. And we see that sense of frustration and impatience with younger employees. We mentioned Gen Alpha as well, and a lot of this is relevant to them when they actually enter the workforce as well. So I mentioned this to Susie when we were prepping this. I wish I'd thought of the term, but somebody christened Gen Alpha screenagers, which I thought was brilliant, because if you think of who they are, from a very, very young age, they're pacified with a screen, you know, watching cartoons or whatever on an iPad. They're entertained by that. As they get older, they use social media through phones and, you know, through Snapchat and Facebook, if that's still relevant nowadays, and whatever else. And then they're actually in schools, they're taught through screens. So if you think of Gen Alpha coming through, the whole life revolves around a screen of some type. So when we're thinking about preparing the workplace for Gen Alpha and how are they going to develop and how are they going to communicate and how are they going to learn and train and gather skills, the likely expectation from them is going to be through some kind of screen interaction. So if all your training at the moment is face-to-face, for example, or shadowing people, that's perhaps not going to work for Gen Alpha as they come into the workplace. So understanding the future and looking to the future and what the workplace of the future looks like is really important as different generations come through the workplace. But listening is key. Listening is really key. And at WorkBuzz, we have a research platform which we've developed, which is flexible, it's simple, it's actionable. And the idea is it supports that continuous employee listening environment. So when we talked earlier about employee engagement being critical. It still is. It's still a really important measure. Been around probably around 15 years now, but still an important measure. But just as important, and if not more important, is looking at the whole employee experience of people who, as they go through your workplace, from I was going to say from the day they join, but it actually starts before that because you're attracted to an organization. So all the way through the lifetime they're with you, to the exit, the day they exit the organization and beyond, because they become alumni and they recommend to the peer groups, the organization, and all the rest of it. So understanding that employee experience is really important. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg here. You know, you can't have a great experience without people who are engaged, and you can't have employee engagement without a fantastic employee experience. So there's a bit of chicken and egg type stuff, but measuring that as you go through that process is really important. So I think there's a couple of things. There's probably 7 key areas I just want to home in on in terms of what are organizations doing to tackle these issues. Well, I think the first thing is lots of organizations now are starting to understand how leaders at all levels manage colleagues and the behaviors they exhibit, because there's not one size fits all leadership style now. You know, in the past, you were, 20 years ago, you would be managing a team, and ages and generations didn't really come into it. You had one style of management, and that's what you applied, and people got on with it. But now, obviously, we're starting to break this down. We're starting to break generations down. We're starting to understand the different motivations and what drives them and how they think and how they act and why they come to work. So whilst you're still may have the title of a team manager, you're not managing a team. You're managing a team of individuals. And understanding what levers to pull for different individuals to get the best out of them is really key. What's the different skill sets? What are the different motivations? So what we're seeing at the moment is a real trend where organizations are starting to break those leadership skills down, those leadership behaviors down, to understand how people can get the best out of the teams. I think the second thing is that, and it really follows on from what I've spoke about just, is that be a leader for all. You know, lots of organizations are starting to look at the entire team. So and they come from a place of safety. So inclusive decision making, open conversations, and once you gather that, once you understand that, that leadership styles like that facilitate that kind of shared experience, what you get is a better sense of teamwork. You get a better sense of shared goals, and it brings teams together. So organisations start to ask the question of themselves, almost look in the mirror of how inclusive is our leadership style. Do people feel involved in the decision-making process? And that's where applicable. You know, this isn't a kind of process where everybody is going to be able to participate in every single decision across the organisation. But where applicable within the scope of the role or the scope of the team role, how inclusive do we make the decision-making process? And that's really key for, again, Generation Y, Generation Z employees, where it's almost become an expectation that they'll be involved in decision-making processes around the role and around the team. Susie mentioned earlier employee value proposition. That's absolutely key, and we've seen over the last probably 18 months now, or getting on for 2 years, there's been real challenges around recruitment and retention. Up until probably September last year, there was 1.5 million vacancies in the UK. So it's a real kind of buyer's market, if you like. So people had to really sharpen the pencil when they were talking about their EVP. They really had to really make their EVP really attractive, so that it brought people to the organisation in the face of challenges from competitors and people within the industry. So understanding, and there's still around about 700,000 vacancies, so it's about half at this point in time, but still a lot out there and a lot of movements. So understanding and measuring your culture is really critical, and your organisation, and particularly the employee experience touch points. So what does it feel like working within your organisation, and can you build a picture of that for potential recruits? Now there's a challenge there, because we all want to kind of stretch, if you like, the image of the organisation to present our best possible selves out into the outside world, but it needs to be realistic. It needs to have a sense of realism with it in terms of the EVP, because you don't want people joining your organisation expecting, an unbelievable experience when the reality is far from that. So what does your EVP look like, and do we need to sharpen our pencil on that? And collecting feedback, I guess this is a theme of my bit of this, but really that regular feedback is really important. So whether it be regular surveys with your employees based on a question set based on your organizational KPIs and behaviors. So don't feel the need to ask questions that you've asked in employee surveys for the last 10 years and to keep asking those questions. If you've got your answers to those questions, look at what you need to ask now. What's the challenges that you've all highlighted earlier in the chat for your organization? And your survey should be based around those. What's your organizational KPIs? What do you want to achieve? What behaviors do you want people to exhibit to achieve those KPIs? And therefore, what questions do you need to ask? So work back through that process. And whether you collect feedback through a regular survey process or pulse surveys or any other way, or we mentioned focus groups earlier, really key as well if you're going to get right to the heart of some of these issues. It's just important to make sure you're listening to people. Communications in organizations only goes three ways. It either comes down, it goes up, or it goes across organizations. And this upward bit is really important so that employees feel they have a voice and feel they can talk back to their organization and feed stuff back that's not working. Different working styles and needs, we've mentioned that already. Susie mentioned that earlier. So be aware of the different variation of work-life balances and different needs across generations. And as we said earlier, that'll change as you get older, as you go through, from being a single young person in an organization to having a family and the needs all around that. So as you get older, and what do you need within an organization? So the work-life balance and the balance between personal and professional life is going to be different for different people. So and also the views on hybrid working are starting to change as well. So we're seeing the move post-pandemic, immediately post-pandemic, to hey, we're all in a hybrid world and we're all going to be working just a day a week in the office, or maybe not at all. Where we're certainly seeing a real move, particularly in the States now, to back to the office working. So the architect, I guess, that the bad guy in that is Elon Musk, who's pulled everybody back into X for 5 days a week, and even Zoom that we're all sat on here have pulled people back into the offices. But we've seen a real trend where it's gone from 1 day in the office to 2 days in the office, perhaps even 3 now. And we'll eventually, when pandemics are in the distant memory, will we be back to where we were pre-pandemic, into 5 days a week in the office? So what's right for your organization, and how do you balance that between people's demand for a balanced work life? And skills and learning and upskilling opportunities. What do different people need? What do different generations need? And can we utilize the skills of different generations? So if we do have Gen Alpha coming through to the workplace, and they're very much based around screens and learning in a different way, and we still got people of Gen X or Gen Y in the workplace when they do come through, what can they learn from each other? How can we utilize the different skills of different generations, and how do we share those different generational skills? And it might be that a Gen Alpha coming through needs some interpersonal skills, which perhaps they don't have. Now, how do we do that? How do we reinforce those messages around a balanced basket of skills, if you like, that we all need in the workplace? And finally, the need to cater to these different learning styles. As I've mentioned, we're going to have a mix of different vehicles in the workplace, learning vehicles in the workplace, that is, to give employees options to learn and develop in different ways. So a really clear understanding of how individuals learn and develop, a really clear understanding of how they assimilate information and take information on board is really important. So, if you're not doing that now, try and understand that for your team. What works for one won't work for another, and how can we do that with a kind of balanced approach? So I think I've got a few final thoughts, and it's really based on what we both spoke about, to be honest. Don't worry too much about these perceived differences. At the end of the day, it is important to understand what drives different generations and the needs, but it's more important to move teams forward as a single unit and focus on the skills and strengths of individuals. So once you know what makes an individual tick, and once you know what levers to pull with that individual, how do you assimilate them into the team and get the best out of them? So it might be team of people who are focused on different things, but they all contribute to the overall aim of the team and and what we need to achieve as a team. So I think there's 4 key areas really: mentoring. How do we mentor younger team members and use mentoring opportunities? And that'll really bring that team together. And that's not just about older people working with younger people. It's also working the other way as well, reverse mentoring, where that knowledge of technology and that knowledge of how things work and how things are going to move, AI and stuff like that. How can they teach older people? So I rely on my team totally for detailed Excel spreadsheets and detailed Excel macros and whatever else. So relying on those people, upward mentoring is really important as well. Multi-generation collaboration, that's really key. Intergenerational teamwork. How do we taking these different perspectives of life and experiences and fostering a culture where they're shared and they're celebrated, and where we can learn from each other. That's really important that collaboration happens, so that we don't end up with cliques of people of one generation or age group over here versus younger people over here. Regular listening, I've mentioned that quite a lot. So regular listening so that people are aware of colleague issues and the needs of the whole team. And finally, sharing knowledge. The younger tech-savvy colleagues, as I say, can educate upwards and share their knowledge. And it's also about the kind of intergenerational learnings that we get from each other. So we're seeing lots of this happening in organisations at the minute, and we're going to see more of that as Gen Alpha starts coming to the workplace, because they're going to need that. They're going to need that interpersonal help and interpersonal development. So that's the kind of everything I wanted to go through, and Susie wanted to go through. We're just wondering if there's any thoughts from people, if anybody wants to generate any thoughts or any observations of what we've shown you, and really to hand it over to you, either through chat. You can put it on there, or either speak up and share with the group. Susie, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, not at all. I think it's exactly like you said, Ian. We're interested to hear what people think are their challenges. And I think this is a really great forum to share best practice, to tailor answers to individuals' challenges, or for other people on the call who think that they've got something to share in terms of best practice and things that works well, then this is the forum to do it in. So yeah, just interested to hear if anybody does feel like they've got challenges in their organisation. Challenges. Oh, here we go. Budget versus culture. Yeah, absolutely. And so, Marie, what do you mean in terms of budget versus culture? Do you mean in terms of actually putting budget into doing things, i.e., having resource and people to do the work to help support it, or culture in budget in terms of developing culture, for example, off-sites and social gatherings? What could you pop a little bit more in, and then perhaps we can give you some tailored advice? I'm really conscious that I want to just where was it? Budget versus culture. So yeah, essentially, if it's budget in terms of the people to look after it, what we'd recommend is setting up an internal committee to look after it. And then you can set up what's called employee resource groups, so ERGs. And you can think about potentially how you reward people for putting in that extra effort. So it could be, for example, people who form part of these committees get an additional day's annual leave. So it's no outlay of cost to the business, but then you can drive people to work on this type of thing. If you're thinking more about how do you actually facilitate intermixing people but without a budget, then you can do things like, here we have afternoon tea time. So the last Thursday of every month, we take it in turns, and each team has to bring in some cakes, and we all take half an hour and we go and have a cup of tea and a slice of cake together. and it's really well attended, and it's not actually cost the business any money. So I think you can get really inventive with these things. It just needs somebody to start it off. Yes, we'll absolutely be sharing the slides. More focus on commercial KPIs. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, depending on what sector you're in, we actually have to produce our KPIs in terms of the DE&I space. We also annually report our engagement survey externally. So, not only is there a requirement to do it in certain industries that are regulated, but there's also a want for people to see that, and whether that's your shareholders, your clients, or employees, there's absolutely more of a commercial focus. Ian, I don't know if you want to comment on anything else around KPIs.
No, in terms of listening to people, in terms of generations, KPIs are really key. But the failing of many organisations is they measure behaviour and they measure change within the organisation, but it doesn't really relate to KPIs. So they always get to the end of a listening programme, whether it be surveys or focus groups, and think, crikey, we've still not answered the question around what commercial KPIs look like for people, and whether we've got the right behaviours in the organisation to achieve them. So it's really about working backwards from those KPIs and what you're trying to achieve as an organisation, and then looking at the behaviours that you want within the organisation to help you achieve those, and then working forward from that. And the generational thing is really key around that, because you need to have leaders and managers at different levels who are driving people towards those KPIs, and sometimes that's not always the case in organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see a last comment that's coming around having a really diverse workforce and types of roles, as well as considering the multi-generational employee base, so that they're constantly reviewing how they improve engagement and communication. And I think that's key. And I think that's a lot of the pieces that we've alluded to, is that, you really need to have a framework that you're working towards, and that will have continual measurement and review in it. But you need the sort of longer term view and where you're trying to get to, in order to make sure that you're really going to achieve on this piece. Super. Well, if there's no more questions, then we'll wrap up. I think Hayley will kindly be sharing the slides with everybody. And as I say, it's got my contact details, Ian's contact details, and various different ways to get in touch with us. So if you've got any questions at all on anything we've covered, or have any specific challenges you want to discuss, then we're absolutely here to answer those questions.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Super. Thanks so much.